I think probably worth kicking off. First off, hello. Thank you very much for joining us today at the end of what I know has been a really amazing 2 days. We're going to be talking to you today about whole service transformation of social safety nets in the UK, in particular universal credit. But before we kick off, just wanted to do some quick introductions. So first off, hi, my name is Anna Hirschfeld. I am a director at Public Digital, and having worked in local government and the non-profit sector, I joined the UK Department for Work and Pensions in 2012. During that time, I was part of the team that designed and delivered universal credit under the leadership of Lara, who's going to be introducing herself in a minute. And my role was very much about a range of things, including digital identity, working with operations, looking at fraud and error, and trying to do that in an inclusive and user-focused way. So I joined Public Digital in 2020, and since then I've been supporting teams in the UK and Canada. Lara, would you just like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Anna. Hello, everyone. I hope you've been having a great day. I am Lara Sampson. I'm a partner at Public Digital. I joined just coming up for a year ago, having spent the best part of 20 years in the UK civil service, and half of those 20 years creating universal credit, which we're going to talk about, in particular, creating the conditions for success for the particular ways of working that has enabled it to go from what at one point was a very troubled program of change to a very successful program of change, some of which I hope we will bring to life for you this evening.
Thanks. So very briefly, just in case you don't know who we are, we're part of Public Digital. This is a picture of the team, actually on our first in-person away day since the pandemic started. So that was a really nice moment for us. But we're a small digital transformation consultancy based in London, but we work globally. There are two things that I think are really worth saying about our team. First is that we represent a huge range of disciplines, including content design, technical architecture, strategy, service design, user research, and on. But second, we've all got lived experience of doing digital transformation on the ground in governments, companies, charities, or all of the above. So we've got the scars from doing a lot of this work ourselves. And that means that we spend a lot of our time telling people not just about some of the exciting things that we've done, but also about the mistakes and helping people avoid some of the ones that we've made in the past. Here's just a really quick sampling of some of the organizations we work with. It's not exhaustive, but just gives you a nice kind of sense of the mixture of organizations that we support, governments across several continents, large companies like HSBC, as well as partnerships with organizations like the UN and Harvard. And then finally, this is just a last little bit about Public Digital, which I think is really important for the presentation and the conversation that we want to have today, is our definition of what digital is. So applying the culture, processes, operating models and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. What we mean by that is technology is important, but to achieve the transformation that any organization needs to thrive in the internet era, there's so much more to be done. The culture, the processes, and the form of the organization takes are equally important. And we're going to be talking a lot about that today. So fundamentally, what are we going to be doing today? We want to hear a little bit from you about the challenges that are happening in the US at the moment. We're going to be talking through a couple of stories about universal credit. We're going to explain what on earth universal credit is for those that don't know. And we're going to have a nice kind of 15-20 minutes time for Q&A at the end. But before we get going, we were hoping to get some input from all of you. It'd be really helpful for us, I think, to kind of get a sense of the challenges and the experience of working in the social safety net world at the moment. And so what we really wanted to do is a quick Slido poll on what do you think the biggest challenges are today for social safety net services, obviously particularly in the US. And we just want to do this as a quick exercise, really just to get a sense of what you're all interested in and what are some of those challenges, hopefully, so we can make sure we're covering some of those in today. So if you would like to take part in the Slido poll, you can either use the QR code or you can join at slido.com and using the hashtag PDCFA22. So I'll give everyone a couple of minutes just to fill that in. Okay. Oh, fantastic. That's really starting to come to life as a word cloud. Just kind of start to see some trends, accessibility coming out really strongly. I saw something around cross-sector collaboration, paperwork, different. I'm intrigued as to what people are thinking about when they say different. And please comment in the chat if there's anything that you want to add in. Marginalised groups have less access. That's definitely something we've experienced in the UK. The complexity of the rules, verification, recertification, jargon, absolutely. That's a real challenge in the benefits world. Income support that's actually livable, yeah. Identifying co-benefits and simplifying eligibility processes, and overall holistic approach, so not just a safety net. That's, I think, a number of those really resonate with both Lara and myself. Let it go for a little bit longer, see if we're getting anything else. Growing caseloads and overworked caseworkers. I think it's something we've definitely known and experienced in the UK as well, particularly during COVID, obviously. That's really fantastic. I think that's a really useful set of examples of some of the challenges that you're all struggling with right now. And I think it's probably fair to say that almost all of those we could talk about from a perspective of what's happened in the UK with social safety nets. Obviously, slightly different context. We don't have the federal to state challenge, but a lot of those issues really resonate with some of the stories that we have and we can tell around universal credit. So I'm just going to move on from that, but thank you so much for everybody. That's really helpful. So we have, as I said, there are a lot of the experiences that we went through during the development of universal credit really resonate and reflect with those challenges that we just saw up there, if in a slightly different context. And so there are umpteen stories we could tell. So I saw things around bad UX, making the right team, tackling things around minorities and marginalized communities not being able to access the service. We can tell, there's many of those stories that we can tell. And to be honest, me and Lara kind of went, hang on, which ones do we want to tell so that we don't end up essentially making this a 5-hour lecture on the history of universal credit. So we've picked a couple out, which I think actually chime really well with some of the things that just came out in the word cloud. So what we want to talk about today is simplifying the benefit system for users, which was one of the key kind of tenets of universal credit, and also then changing the whole organisation to meet that challenge. We'll also talk a little bit about the COVID response as well. So before we get into those stories, though, I'm going to hand over to Lara, who's going to talk about what universal credit actually is.
Thank you, Anna. So yes, having quite recently visited a number of you in the States, actually, it struck me how important it is before we embark on this to describe what we mean by universal credit, because it has a lot of meanings to it. So first of all, it is a policy idea, which is a huge simplification of a very complex system. So before universal credit started, we had 6 different forms of support and payments. And those different forms of support and payments are to families and individuals, and basically had grown over time with successive governments since our welfare state started and was conceived after the Second World War. So the concept of universal credit is both a policy one, and I'll come on to the objectives of it from a policy point of view, but also a delivery one. The idea being to remove all of those carbuncles of different types of support and simplify it into one single one, which is universal credit. I should be absolutely clear here that all of these 6 different forms are for people that we would describe of as working age. So it's the only thing it doesn't include is pensioner benefits. So those are the different forms of support of payments, but it's also a huge organizational simplification, moving from 2 huge departments of state. So HMRC, Revenue and Customs, is the equivalent of your IRS, along with 345 local authorities who are all delivering those different forms of benefits, and Department for Work and Pensions, to say nothing of the role of various social housing associations and charities and so on. So its second concept was not just that you'd simplify what people were entitled to, but we would also simplify the organizational design of how that support was accessed, by bringing that all under the auspices of the Department for Work and Pensions. And before I go on to what we did to make that happen, I just want to explain a bit about the policy drivers. So that ecosystem of safety net payments that I showed you, if we move on one, Anna, simply was not working. So as you can imagine, with that amount of complication, you have people underclaiming, not knowing what they are entitled to and not claiming things that are entitled to. People not wanting to go over more than 16 hours of work because you drastically lost benefits at that point, as they were taken away from you. Cliff edges between different benefit types. So if you end one, you have to then claim a new one, and you may have a big gap in your income in that period. As you can, inevitably, loads of errors, not because people are necessarily trying to defraud the system, but just because the system is so complicated, they simply can't be right, stay on top of their information all of the time. And so many different organizations administrating those services that it's deeply inefficient and actually very, very costly. So those are the things that weren't working, and therefore, from a kind of policy point of view and a design point of view, universal credit was conceived of to solve those problems. So its intention is to remove the cliff edges between benefits. So we go forward one. So remove those cliff edges between benefits by folding them into one that just responds to your circumstances, by making sure people receive everything that they are entitled to, and we'll come on to how we did that. Really critically, and we're not going to talk a great deal about this, it's an additional area that we could talk about for ages, kind of incentivizing work, or making work pay in a way that the old system didn't. And putting it in the hands of a single organization that would be accountable for end-to-end delivery, quality of customer service, and of outcomes. So again, if we move on to actually talking about simplifying that benefit system for users, that is all fine conceptually. And in 2010, we got a new government, and they came in and they put a massive, great big document on, slammed it on the desk and said, here's our idea. Can you go away and deliver that? But of course, beneath those very good intentions is a lot of challenge in terms of delivering it. So what we want to talk about is how we turned that into an actual service, and what did we do and what did we learn in the course of doing that. And our first story we're going to tell is going to concentrate on simplifying the benefit system, taking that idea of folding all the different possible benefits into a single one. And although this was, enabled by a big policy change in the UK, and it is not always going to be possible or desirable in other countries for such a scale of policy change to be introduced, we think that a great deal of what we did with it in universal credit could be done actually through service design and delivery. You don't necessarily need a full policy change to achieve some of the benefits. So again, if we can move on one. I think the first thing to say is this, and this is obvious, and particularly from the word cloud earlier, actually, it's obvious, but it can't be underestimated. And in many ways, that policy idea, when it arrived with us in the department, did massively underestimate this point. At the point being that people are complicated, their needs, their capabilities and behaviours vary hugely. How they access services, their level of confidence, their ability to budget, whether they accept or reject help, whether they worry about getting things exactly right to the point of constantly looking for validation, or whether they just kind of ignore instructions. The array of those kinds of behaviours is absolutely extraordinary, as wide as it can be. Secondly, that not only are people complicated, their lives are complicated, and we are obviously talking about people who are often at the most vulnerable moments of their lives. Also very often at a point of extreme turmoil, whether it's loss of a job, a family breakdown, it could be leaving prison, they could have started suffering a physical or mental illness. And so they're, almost by definition, they are all vulnerable, and their lives are at a point of turmoil. And in some ways, this is the most critical thing that we learned as a department in terms of how to create a service that would meet the needs of people, is that inevitably the position that they present us with does not remain the same. The one thing you can be sure of is that it will change in some way, and therefore the design of the service needs to respond to that from the absolute outset. And I would say that if I look back and characterize the benefits that universal credit replaced, they had a very linear view of design. Like, you arrive, you get some help, and then you leave. And the kind of mental model of universal credit is like a circle, not a line. It's a circle of support that just responds to you as you're going through your life. So with all of that as background, what did we do? And before I come on to some of the kind of design ideas to show what we did, it's important that I say that the most important principle we adopted is one of test and learn. That was our language. It was our mantra for the whole program of work. And that mantra meant whatever we start with will be wrong, and the purpose of starting is to learn what people need so that we can change it and make things better. And that was an absolutely non-negotiable motto that we used throughout, all the way from when we started this in 2013 and continues to this day. Anna and I know, even though we're no longer there. So with that said, here I just want to talk through some of the kind of core things that we did that we think help simplify the benefit system for users. So first of all, we removed the need to navigate a complex system. So we took away the need effectively to understand how the benefit system in the UK worked. We said, tell us about you and we'll work out what support you can get. So this is the list of questions that we asked people to answer to begin with for their whole household. And then we used the answers to those to start building the support that they needed around that. Secondly, we made it clear what you're getting, what financial support they would get, what it's based on, like what set of circumstances it's based on, and when they would get it every month so they could forward budget. And that seems extraordinarily obvious that you would do that. But certainly in our previous systems, the experience was very black box. So you put in some information and, you get some money out at some point. And the principle here is effectively of transparency and treating our users with respect so that they can, so that they own the information. It's their information. It's not our information. They own the information. And we make it absolutely clear exactly what information we have on them that they have given us and what we're using to calculate their payment. Thirdly, we made it easy for them to do the right thing and to keep their information up to date. So this is a picture of something we called a to-do, which is basically a kind of a prompt for someone to do something. In this case, for them to tell us about a likely change to their rent. So an event happens, we know it's likely that their rent has changed, and we're prompting them in here to tell us about that in order that their payment remains accurate, whether that has gone up or down. And this is a very good example of where we iterated this, like these rents change kind of fairly, they change annually. We know when it's likely to happen. And we iterated this design year on year to make it easier and easier for people to understand what to put in and to put that in a timely fashion. And then the fourth kind of key service design idea, I suppose, was to make the service like a conversation or a relationship. So it has as a concept within it this idea of a journal, which is a way of users putting in, they can reach out effectively to get help from either their work coach or case manager, which Anna will talk about a little bit later. And that means that the relationships between the people, between them and the people that are helping them, who have access to all of their information, are built up, and it increases confidence in the users with the system. In this case, that this is asking for help with something to do with finding work. So that kind of idea of like this is a two-way street is really was really important in terms of how we thought about universal credit. And then the last kind of thing to say, like I was worried that that's a lot of, I've shown you a lot of screenshots, which makes it could be perceived as very much kind of just an online service. So I think important to also say that we designed all of these things to be used across all channels. So whether it is people working with someone in a prison, as in the top right, or whether it's the tools for someone in a contact center in the bottom right to help people, or indeed the work coaches and job centers. So all of those things I've talked to you about were to work across all channels, not just in an online channel. So from that bit, just quickly, what did we learn from that kind of like the kind of core design concepts of universal credit? We learned that actually the majority of people can claim and manage their account online, like way more than people thought was going to be the case when we started. But a good number of them, as many as a quarter, do need some help in order to be able to do so. But it was amazing how willingly people took help and learned how to use it. We learned that you can talk to your heart's content about trying to help someone find a job, but until they've got like sorted out their financial situation, you're basically talking into the void. So, help people where they need that help to get emotional security before you try and shift their behavior for the longer term. Iterative design improves outcomes better than any like big single leap in a single direction, and stops you going in the wrong way and over investing in the wrong ideas. And benefit systems are really just very complicated things. And importantly, once you get to any scale at all, there is no such thing as an edge case. You need to design for the needs of everyone and not go through the 80-20 rule is a bit of a dangerous game to play here. So I'm going to pass over to Anna now for the second story we wanted to tell.
Thanks, Lara. So I think everything we just showed you was a huge part of being able to deliver the concept of universal credit, but it wasn't enough on its own to meet the outcomes and the design of how this was going to work online or in a job center or in a prison. It wasn't just the design of the system that would make that transformation possible. It was a need to change the whole organization. So this is something that one of our colleagues, Tom Loosemore, said a while ago, and I thought it was a particularly useful phrase, which is, if your policy intent is predicated on changing behaviour, you won't get there by digitising today's processes. What we just showed you and the aims of universal credit around removing those breaks between benefits, helping people look for more work or look for work at all, to manage their life in a way that was much better for them. That was just a complete change in how people thought about the benefit system in the UK. And we really realised that to change that, we needed to change the whole organisation. So that wasn't just the design of the policy or the way that the Department for Work and Pensions managed technology, it was the whole organisation. There were lots of different things that we did to change the organisation. Again, there are many more stories to tell, but I think this is one of those fundamental changes that we wanted to talk a little bit about today. People are complicated, lives change, we're dealing with the most vulnerable in society. However, for a lot of those who worked in the department and in the other departments who'd run benefit services, a lot of people had prided themselves on knowing every rule in a 500-page rule book, being able to navigate the system, knowing all the codes for every type of job you can get in the UK. Yes, there really is a code for every single one of them, and all preferably from a back office without having to actually speak to someone who was claiming. Simplification of the benefit system meant that, and some of the technical changes, automation that we could do meant they wouldn't need to know the rules in that way anymore. And actually what they needed to do was spend more time looking at the person in front of them and understanding their human needs. So how did we help those internal users make that shift from experts in benefit rules to experts in humans? So one of the ways that we did that is was in the design and delivery of the service. So bringing operational delivery into the user-centered approach. So the picture that you can see here with Lara sat on the floor, I think, at the front, is the team that delivered universal credit. It's a multidisciplinary team. It includes all the kind of classic digital roles that you would expect to see. So there are developers there are testers, there are designers, there are user researchers, there are agile coaches. But more importantly, within that picture, you can see operational experts in how you run the front office, so job centres, how you run call centres, how you think about fraud and error in the benefits system. So building the service together and embedding user needs into the design of not just the online account, but everything we did with our clients. And then that approach then kind of followed through, I guess is the best way to describe it, into the design of how the organization managed its caseload. So before this, offices of people would essentially be focused on single tasks. You would find whole offices just for working on payments or just working on verification of a single thing, which meant that they would only be able to see enough information to discharge one single task, not look at everything that's happening with that person. They could answer one query, but couldn't answer all the questions that someone had when they were on the phone. They could be making a decision about one thing in complete isolation of any other decisions that are being made about that claim for that person. And that could be the impact of that could be incredibly serious, including stopping your benefits, leaving you without money to cover housing costs or health conditions. So in order to shift the organization to be human-centered, we designed the whole service to think of the person first. So rather than being focused on your task list, you are focused as a member of staff on your claimant list, who your claimants are, what their situation is. So you're looking after people and you're looking after families rather than looking at individual tasks. And as I kind of said already, automating processes allows staff to focus on those most complex and vulnerable people. So for example, we automated a number of processes around verifying housing costs when someone was in what we consider social housing, which meant we could trust the organisation that was charging the rent to be correct on what those housing costs were. By taking that process away, you give people who are experts around housing and housing costs more time to spend on the complex housing needs of those with complex lifestyles, those who are currently homeless, those who have large families or their family shape is changing. And so the job of a DWP member of staff changed from being about filling in the forms with a person sat on the other side of the screen or on the other end of the phone, but being about work search conversations, help with skills, education, support around finding homes, very much a different experience for everybody. So this approach to designing the whole service and also the organizational processes that were part of that really showed their success in how we were able to manage our response to COVID. And so I'm going to hand over to Lara just to talk a little bit more about that, and then a little bit more about what we've learned overall.
Excellent, thank you. So just a little bit more, and then we will open up to comments and conversations. I have not answered a question in the chat so far, Anna, but other than struggling to understand the question. So I just wanted to think a bit about what that meant when COVID hit us in the UK. The impact of COVID, the chart that we have that shows the increase in claims will look like the same chart that every other country in the world has with any kind of benefit system, in that we came under enormous pressure. So if we go on just one, Anna. So as I'm sure you exactly experienced, in March 2020, the increase in claims to universal credit went up about 500%. And I just want to reflect on what made it possible for us to withstand this level of pressure at the beginning and throughout, but particularly at that point, given that everyone's systems came under pressure, but universal credit stood up to it. It's one of the kind of proudest moments, I think, for Anna and I, that we were able to make sure that we were getting money to the people who needed it most in the country at that incredibly dire time, and actually that we weren't on the front page of any paper, but the former is obviously way more important. And I'm going to show you a very techie slide to say that I think it's really because of this. And this looks like it's to do with technology, and obviously, and it's not, but a little bit. Obviously, system performance, taking just like that sheer weight of traffic, it was a very good thing that universal credit was cloud hosted and that we could scale to meet that pressure. But actually, what made it possible is the fact that we could make multiple changes, some of them really, really radical, and sometimes many in a single day. So you can see on the left, before COVID, we would typically make about 4 changes to the service in a month, which is, pretty good. Fortnightly changes, constantly improving and iterating based on what we're learning. But between mid-March 2020 and mid-April, we made 73 of those changes. And this is obviously partly enabled by having a mature digital capability. We had a well-trodden, practiced and very secure, sort of safe release pipeline. So we could put stuff out and we knew we wouldn't break the technology, and had been doing that for years. So that's an important hygiene factor. But actually, the reason we were really able to make those changes is because of that multidisciplinary approach that Anna was talking about, because the teams, which by the point of April 2020 was not that one team in a room in the picture Anna showed, but was 15 teams of about 300 people, but they were split into multidisciplinary teams made up of operational delivery, policy, and all the digital skills that you would expect. Looking after bits of the service. And those people knew the system so well, even though it is incredibly complicated, that they could make really quite big design decisions very fast with a great deal of confidence. So, for example, we very quickly had to change the whole identity verification process. So that's, what screen changes need to be, changes to screens need to be made, what outgoing messages, texts, emails need to be changed, what manual processes need to be changed, what guidance to our internal staff needs to be changed. And they were able to do all of that, knowing what the knock-on effects would be on the ecosystem that is universal credit, because they all work together. And we're used to working together and making those changes. And actually, because we had established a level of trust between operational delivery, between ourselves and in the product development team, but also at the senior levels in the organization, that people were prepared to take what otherwise would have felt like a very, very risky set of decisions, that allowed us to make it possible to process all of those claims and pay people on time. And we did, throughout this period, pay the vast majority of people their full entitlement on time, and maintained our performance in that respect throughout the COVID pressure. So I hope that kind of brings to life how this way of working when you're under that level of pressure kind of means you can be so responsive to the context that you find yourself in. So just finally, and then we can open up to questions and discussions. We were thinking, well, can we impart again a little bit more thoughts on what we learned? And obviously there is so much that we learned. We're incredibly privileged to have spent years of our professional lives learning on the job of, you know, one of the greatest transformations the UK has been through. But we challenged ourselves to pick the top few most important ones. I think probably I've already said it enough, but this multidisciplinary way of working, like genuinely not part-time, can I check this with you, but like actually teams 100% working together, you know, knowing each other well, with really well-established trust, making decisions, you know, hour by hour together has been absolutely fundamental. Secondly, human-centered ways of working. So really understanding the individuals, investing in following the empirical evidence. So be that through user research, be that through data, so understanding where people are when they are presenting themselves and needing help. Thirdly, the effort to create the conditions for success. So this kind of test and learn idea that I referred to earlier. The senior leadership of Universal Credit spent almost all of its time and effort educating people what it meant to be a test and learn organization, and therefore creating space for those multidisciplinary teams to get on with the job of delivering services in a human-centered way. And that kind of narrative, you know, including ministers standing up in Parliament and saying, we are testing and learning, we're going to pause because we have, you know, come across a problem. We always said we might pause because we're testing and learning. That narrative and those conditions for success is just like, that's the whole job of the senior leadership, is kind of what it's there to do. And then fourthly, starting small and testing and learning, partly actually, mainly because it's the right thing to do, because you need the humility to know that you can't possibly know the answer for something that requires this degree of behavior change, but also actually because it helps the organization have the time to learn how to do this, because it takes a lot of bravery to be public about the fact that you're going on a test and learn journey, and starting small and doing that incrementally allows the organization to go with you. So I think we're going to stop there and hand over to you to see if you would like to ask us questions on any of that in particular, or any other thing that occurred to you that you wish we had talked about.
We have some questions in the chat that we haven't covered yet, so I might bring in some of those. So Lisa Perrin asked, can you talk about more about what it took to shift from focusing on the task to focusing on the family claimant? There's a lot going on in that couple of sentences that you walked through. Do you want to? Oh, I should have.
Shall I? So this is probably the biggest single culture shift that we had to go through from kind of how operations were used to working. I think a mistake we made early on was we kind of designed it, or we've designed this lovely thing where you can see your claimants. And at one point we were going quite fast to kind of push that out. And we realized really very quickly that we needed a whole kind of education program that needed to go out into operational delivery to help people get used to working like this. And we used a mechanism that we ended up using quite a lot in the program, which is it's again the starting small and testing and learning principle. So finding a contact center or a job center, embedding it there, and then sort of training the trainers to then expand it out from that one place that we had got it working. The thing that was hardest was not the frontline staff who kind of lap this up. It's like, how fantastic. Imagine you've got a caseload of people that you know about, and you don't have to start at the beginning every time. The thing that's really difficult is the management layer, who are very used to counting things, like what is my, what's my backlog look like, what's my head of work. And we had to work a lot with them to give them tools that were the new things to count. So how did they know if their team was doing well or not? And that's where we ended up having to put a lot of our effort.
I'm just kind of going through some of the questions in the Q&A as well. The idea, Deirdre I should know how to say this one. My name is Hirschfeld. Hirschfeld is the idea of the journal entry is phenomenal. Can you talk about how you worked with that data once you had it? Who sees those entries, processes that information? I can cover that one. So yeah, it was phenomenal. I think it really was part of changing that whole conversation that we just talked about in terms of talking to a person rather than dealing with a task. Made it much more relational. Who saw those entries? This is a good example of how we iterated something. So at first, essentially, the journal was a black box that you could write a message to, and someone, hopefully your work coach, usually your work coach would be the person who'd respond. Wasn't necessarily always the right person to talk to you about that specific issue. They might be a better expert to talk to you about your housing needs or a vulnerable claimant challenge. So we iterated it to begin to build out more specific questions that you could ask the journal. So you could say, I want to know more about my payment, or I'm wanting to talk about my work search activities. So that not only made it easier for us to send those entries to the right people, but it also gave us a lot more data on the kind of questions that people were asking us and helped us in iterating other parts of the service. So why are we getting lots of questions around payments right now? Are they all to do, what's the data showing us, both quantitative and qualitative? So taking, samples of those journal entries and looking at them. So it was a really useful tool from a kind of actually delivering the service, but also from designing and iterating on it.
And probably worth saying, Anna, actually, that when COVID hit, we did a thing that we'd been slightly nervous about doing, but because we got very worried about not being able to see anyone face to face, even the most vulnerable people, we started analysing journal entries for signs of distress.
Yeah.
So that we could do proactive interventions. And it really forced us to take a bold move, because we'd been quite hesitant, thinking that we hadn't got our data analysis good enough. So yeah, I think we've probably scratched the tip of the iceberg in terms of its potential.
Got one from Shirley Beckins. Did the team engage in a study of potential unintended consequences and feedback effects under universal credit? It's a good question.
So I'll do what we might, I don't know, we might have two different answers to this. It'd be interesting. So I think the team did lots and lots of research and understanding the effects of UC, but so did the rest of the world. I think it's kind of worth, saying this obviously very, very high profile change. And so it's not just what you do yourself as a team, which is very often the work that we were doing is focused on the immediate needs of users and trying to understand, kind of like having actionable design research. So what would we, how would we make this thing better? But there was a lot of studies on by a variety of organizations, particularly from people who are worried about people's ability to budget with a service that is predominantly designed to be monthly, and some studies on kind of the effects of a digital service. So a lot of what we did was quite often take some of those quite critical studies and unpack them to work out, to separate out the lobbying from the kind of, actual genuine feedback, so that we could then build more focused, actionable studies on the back of that. I don't know if there's anything you'd add.
No, I think again there was a lot of learning of small unintended consequences as well. I think there were lots of moments when you've done user testing before you put something out, but you never quite know how either citizens or staff are going to use something until it actually gets out there in the world, which is why iterating on it was so important. For example, how people handled claiming as a household was something that we iterated a lot on, because we found that people didn't always understand that, or were putting something that wasn't quite right, because they thought that was going to be the right way to get through the benefit system. So yeah, so I think there's lots of little examples like that of where we iterated and learned about kind of unintended consequences as we went along. But we had the space to do that and the time to do that, which was really, really key. I've got another kind of metric-y question, but it's slightly different, which is, well, quite different. So from Mark Hebert, which is success metrics can shape behaviours. In government, they may be mandated. What was your approach to changing, lifting up or downplaying those metrics, if at all? I might leave that one for you.
I mean, this mandation of metrics is, so I guess some of this comes down to political context that you're working in. So we took what we measured very, very seriously in terms of thinking about the behaviors it would generate. So if we think about back to that kind of, I've got a caseload, like we got the organization to stop counting certain things. So stop counting payments. You need to count, like there's no point counting a payment. You've got to count, you've got to care about, is the whole of this case in a good shape? So we worked really hard on those metrics. And I think through the majority of the life, certainly in the early stages of universal credit, we were very fortunate that our political context was quite well aligned to what we were trying to do. That is not always going to be the case, and and quite often there is a lot of pressure. The hardest place, I think, with metrics in our world comes with, how do you know a work coach is using their time well to help people to get back to work? I mean, I guess my reflection would be, it really matters. You try as hard as you possibly can to build alliances around what's good to measure and what are good metrics. But we all live in a democracy, and there are times where political contexts are going to push you to in certain directions that you might not think is completely aligned with your design.
Yeah, it happens. It's what's being a civil servant. And then we've got 5 minutes to the end, so we've got one more question, probably. So this is from Daniel Yee. So for a project that's this ambitious in terms of vision and scale, what did your core project team look like?
I think this is an excellent question, and I was looking at it and thinking kind of how to answer this, because there are so many versions of a core project team. But I think I would start with, and then see how you want to add, Anna. I would start with a really senior level version of the project team. So we had a senior team which had the kind of program director for the whole program, the SRO, which is our kind of most senior civil servant that's responsible for overall delivery, the operational director, product development director, which is me, and people who are wrangling money out of the treasury and planning and all of that sort of stuff, and the policy director. Those people meeting every single week for 3 whole hours, basically focused on creating those conditions for success, solving the problems of the teams who are trying to do all the things that we've just described, like literally set up most of the time to be in kind of servant mode. I would say, like, what do you need from us? What do we need to do to enable you to go and do that? And that, I think, is, I mean, it's interesting. We didn't even talk about that, Anna. It's another story we could tell, but that was so fundamental to the way, like we talked about conditions for success being essential and the investment of time. That team being at the heart was a really important part of that. And I guess that is replicated as we grew. I guess that kind of basic model gets replicated and
again and again.
Again and again.
Yeah, I think, and I think the thing that I really like to kind of talk about, and there's the thing I think that was so important for the success of Universal Credit, it was that multidisciplinary team, but particularly those coming from the organisation, from operations, from security, from policy, and that this was their full-time job. And that this wasn't a side of the desk activity. This wasn't a part-time thing. Each one of those people who are part of that multidisciplinary team were there every day. And as we scaled, the numbers of those individuals grew as well, so that it wasn't that we were all trying to fight for one subject matter expert. Each team had their own policy experts, their own operations experts, and kind of scaling that model was so important, and made just making decisions and being able to make decisions at pace really, really achievable, which was a different story, but a really important thing for being able to actually deliver at pace and make that fortnightly release, if not that daily release, when we were during COVID. So we've got 1 minute to go, and I think it's probably time to wrap up, as I'm sure everyone is ready to head off to whatever's happening next at Code for America. I think this is one of the final sessions, but we just both want to say thank you so much for listening to us and for all your really, really good questions, really interesting questions. Please do get in touch with us. We're at Public Digital, and I'm sure you can find our contact details somewhere in the Code for America system. But yeah, thank you very much for listening to us today.